welcome back to Hazel's Flight School Beer Edition. I'm Josh Gosnell here with Lily Margolis, and today we'll be diving into hoppy beers, everybody's favorite divisive beer style nowadays. So it seems like IPA has become king of the world in beers. If somebody doesn't have an IPA, they're probably doing something very niche, very fun. But every brewery, every bar you go to nowadays has an IPA, has some sort of hoppy beer. But today we're going to kind of explore a little bit of what hoppy beer means, because it doesn't always have the same definition depending on the beer that you're trying. So, Lily, do you like hoppy beers?
I have no idea if I like hoppy beer.
Let's get started. So, first here, we have La Cumbre Elevated IPA.
And when I'm tasting beer, should I be swirling it like one?
A little bit. With wine, it's not nearly as important to volatilize everything, to get all those aromas. It is important, but you also don't want to be spilling foamy beer everywhere. So it's a little harder to do. Just a little bit. You see some of that carbonation bubble up.
Okay.
Some of those molecules, some of that stuff coming into the air through that carbonation, that nucleation process. So you want to look at a couple different things when you're looking at beer. First, the appearance. What does it look like? We can tell just looking at all three of these side by side. This one has a slightly more amber color to it. That'll tell you a little bit about what to expect. But we also go from the aroma, same as in wine. We taste it, or we smell it rather, before we taste it. And what do you get?
It smells lighter than I thought it would based on the color. I was expecting it to be like a stronger scent, and that makes me think that when I actually taste it, it'll be lighter than I was expecting.
Good.
What do you smell?
I smell just an American IPA. You have that hop presence front and center. There are certain defining characteristics of that, but to me, it's like you get sort of that danker hop feel to it. Hops being a cousin of weed, that'll be one of those descriptors we use for it. We'll get that dank, weedy sort of smell to it. Not necessarily the same as if somebody lit a joint in the room, but you'll get some of those notes off of it. You get off of these guys some pine or citrus fruit. And again, this is all subjective, for sure. I'll smell and taste something different. You'll smell and taste something different. So will you. Then on to, what does the mouth feel like? We do something very similar to wine. We don't have to swish it around like crazy, because then you'll be spewing foam out your mouth. We don't have to quite go that far. But a little swirl, just get some of those bubbles, that carbonation. What does it feel like?
It felt like I swished it around too much, and I was about to spit bubbles everywhere.
And what did you taste?
Well, usually, as like a beer beginner, whenever I drink beer, I feel like I get a really bitter aftertaste. But on this one, more so, I started getting like bitter notes sooner than I usually do, and the aftertaste wasn't quite as intense for me.
Yeah, with this style, kind of that American IPA, you get that bitterness up front.
Mm-hmm.
You get a little bit of the finish, and then you can feel what gives it this color is a little bit of a darker roasted malt. Not super dark, as we can look into later, but with this, you get a touch of a caramely maltiness to it. You feel just like it's like a cracker or something that has a ton of herbs on it.
Yeah.
So something like that is kind of how I think about this guy. And then on that finish, getting bright citrus notes, getting more of that piney aspect, like you're chewing on a handful of pine needles as well. Just that nice evergreen feel.
I like the pine needles.
Bring me to a mountain forest and just drink that in. That's how I feel about this. And just again,
really like the bubble size on this.
Yeah, so it's not overly carbonated like some, but it does have enough carbonation to cut through all of that. So yeah, moving on to the next, we have Fremont Lush. This one, same sort of feel, similar sort of feel.
I'm getting more of a tropical, like mango, little, like I should be
Exactly.
drinking this like somewhere warm, than compared to like mountain
Yeah,
drinking
no,
location.
that tropical fruit is spot on. I'd agree 100% on that. You still get some of those notes of, like, still using some of those classic American hops. You get a little bit of that pininess, but a little more subdued. This is definitely on a not as aggressively or outwardly bitter on the nose, not as aggressively hoppy.
Are hops what give beer the bitter taste?
In general,
Okay.
yeah, so hops do provide a bit of that bitterness to it. A little bit of a balancing act, if you will. Because with all of those malts, if we were to just skip out on the yeast completely, it would, or skip out on the hops completely, it would leave just sweet water, basically sweet, bready water. So the opposite of that would be the bitterness
Yeah.
of the hops. So it's a delicate balancing game.
Yeah. So if you like bitter flavors, you're gonna like a hoppier beer pretty much.
Not necessarily, because there's different kinds of bitter. We see this sort of bitterness with that piney, or almost astringent feel to it. Whereas you can also go dark chocolate, which is a different feel
Yeah.
of bitterness, which we can get to with some of the stouts and porters. They'll still have hops, but that bitterness may be driven by something else as well.
Are there different kinds of hops?
There are hundreds of different kinds of hops. It hasn't quite gotten as intense as the weed naming structure where you have bubblegum, wedding cake, granddaddy kush hops. Nothing quite like that. But there are hundreds of different kinds of hops out there. Coming from Europe, coming from the United States, coming from the Southern Hemisphere, New Zealand being a huge new market of hop varieties that we're just being introduced to.
When you're growing hops, does the weather and soil impact the flavor, and you can have like year-to-year varietals based on climate?
I mean, absolutely, yeah. Which is why some of these portions, there is like a sweet spot in growing climate for hops, as with grapes, as with oranges, as with anything. So these certain climates, these certain temperatures provide that growing environment, and even down to the soil itself. We don't talk about terroir too much in beer, but it does play a part. You have American grown Cascade, you have New Zealand grown Cascade. And if you see those in beers, you can see a marked difference between where it's grown and then the hop itself too. So yeah, it absolutely matters across the board, and it's fun to just experiment with.
Yeah.
That's why there's so many IPAs out there. There's so many different styles of hops and different ways you can use them. You can literally play mad scientist with beer. You can do anything to your heart's content. Will it work? That's another question. But these brewers, these beers, they can just have fun with it at a certain point. You know, they can just throw it at the wall, see what sticks, and have fun. That's one of my favorite parts of being in craft beer, is the creativity, the wildness that can come with beer. And IPA is a great place to find that. All these different hops, different styles, methodologies. Is an absolute blast to go through if you enjoy something nice and hoppy like this. So marking a difference between some of our kind of West Coast, newer style, and then going into hazy or New England style IPAs. Another one of the big oncomers to the scene recently. We went through phases in the beer drinking world, going back from Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, one of the originators of it, to nowadays the newer styles that we get. The complaint being IPAs are too bitter. IPAs are too strong. IPAs are too heavy. It's gone through different phases and it's always evolving. So the New England or hazy IPA was kind of an adaptation to that, where it's too bitter. How do we pull some of the bitterness back off of that? You know, you sit it in for a long amount of time, you get the bitterness off of it. You steep it for a shorter amount of time, you get some of this more aroma. You notice some of the tropical fruit character off of the second beer we tried.
And I mean, obviously, like, looking at this, there's a clear difference.
Looking at the
liquid, but why does it look different?
I'm going to probably ruin a few people's day here with this comment.
No.
The New England style IPAs, you say you don't like wheat beers. A lot of the New England style IPAs you've been drinking are in essence hoppy wheat beers. Wheat is one of the additions that they use to make that cloudy body to it. Oats, rye from time to time, the amount of hops that go into the IPA, especially on that later end, those later additions, the yeast that they use can create that hazy body. But yeah, wheat,
if
oats.
If you filtered it a bunch, would it look clear?
It would look clearer.
Okay.
For sure. Like this guy, I just spitballing here, I would say it does go through some sort of filtration in one way, shape, or form. Because if you see hazy, really, really hazy New England style IPAs, it can look like you just poured a glass of orange juice. It's opaque.
Yeah.
And then there is obviously a spectrum there as well. It may not be the haziest IPA out there, but it fits that category. There's some haze, there's some opacity to the body.
Oh, yeah.
And then especially on the nose and the palate, you can tell a lot of that bitterness, a lot of that upfront bitterness has been taken away. You get more of a fruit-driven character, a softer kind of IPA.
It definitely smells sweeter to me.
I've heard that as well. Hazy IPAs can sometimes give us that impression of being a little bit sweeter. On the nose, you get that perceived sweetness. You get fruit and not a ton of bitterness to back that up. It may seem like it feels sweet. That's absolutely right. And then you get to the palate, and it is also just as soft in my mind.
That's definitely my favorite.
And it's a lot of people's favorite nowadays.
Yeah.
New England styles are definitely a big craze in the craft beer world. A lot of people kind of turning back to the West Coast, those more traditional American style IPAs. But the hazy or New England style definitely has made its mark on craft beer.
Yeah, and like for me, the bitter taste is definitely where I struggle with beer, and this takes a lot of that away. And I feel like when it doesn't have that as strong of a bitter aspect, I can focus on like the actual flavors of the beer more than just thinking, oh, it's so bitter. And that's
Right.
like the overwhelming taste for me.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of people have kind of really gone hard into the New England styles. They're a lot softer. They're not as aggressively bitter, because that's what a lot the comment I get is, I don't want a hoppy beer. All three of these are hoppy beers.
Yeah.
Some are a little more bitter, while some are not. So it may not necessarily be the hops, but in what way they're used in the beer brewing process
Gotcha.
that creates a bitter or a more aromatic, more softer, fruit-driven sort of beer. That should wrap up our small dive into hoppy beers. We thank you all for watching us. I would like to throw a big thanks out to Dylan Schwab from Crooked Stave Artisans, definitely helping us out with the beers, helping us show Lily what hoppy beers are all about. Thank you for joining us today.
Ask your beer questions in the comments and come fly again with us next time.